Is your focus on all the things that are wrong, drowning out your potential for happiness? Well, today on Love, Happiness, and Success, we are diving into the science of positive psychology with Dr. Nick Holton of the Anti-Fragile Academy. He has helped many, many people transform their mindset from pessimism to authentic and productive optimism. Over the course of our conversation today, you'll discover why trying to air quote, just be positive often backfires, how embracing difficult emotions actually leads to greater happiness, and some of the surprising research showing that positivity is a skill you can develop, not a personality trait you're born with. So stay with us all the way to the end to get practical strategies to boost resilience, increase joy, and create a life of genuine happiness without toxic positivity that can frankly make things worse. So, Dr. Nick, welcome. And I'm so glad we're having this incredibly important conversation.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here and looking forward to it as well.
Yeah, wonderful. So, all right, just to set this up a little bit, can you tell our listeners just a little bit about yourself and where you are coming from? Because I think everybody likes the idea of having more positivity, more joy, more strength, more resilience in their life, but that it can feel really challenging to cultivate these things in a way that feels trustworthy, authentic. I mean, toxic positivity is a thing.
Sure.
So, for people to understand what we're going to be talking about today and how it can help them, I think they need to understand a little bit about you.
Sure.
That's
Sure.
okay? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. The somewhat abbreviated version is I knew early on I wanted to coach and teach.
Mhm.
Basically, I knew early on I liked the feeling of helping people level up. So I went into education thinking
Mm.
that was a place and a system and a context in which I'd get to do that frequently.
Yeah,
And to a
one would
certain extent
assume.
that one would assume. And to a certain extent that was true. And, certainly I guess here, at least in the States, there's many cases in which that is not happening in
Mm,
education or in classrooms.
yeah.
So, like a bit of a bozo, I decided to go back to graduate school and see if I could get answers.
Mm,
I got none in my master's program, but I did get exposed to the most popular TED Talk of all time, which is Sir Ken Robinson, Do Schools Kill Creativity? This opened me up to a concept he would later kind of write a book about called The Element.
mm,
And I ended up actually then going into my PhD program with that as kind of my core intellectual itch. And the element is basically passion, right, for a young person. So I went in saying, how do we pull the best out of people? Right. And through my research, what I started finding were terms that would more or less kind of fall under this umbrella of maybe positive psychology. Now, plenty of academics listening will know that some of the things we'll talk about do not neatly fit into these categories, and that's fine. But the way I'm talking about here, we're really just referring to a very conscious and intentional effort to try to build well-being and or life satisfaction or thriving, and we can nerd out on what those different
mm,
things mean. But this was a really important paradigm shift because really in most contexts prior to say 1998, a lot of psychological research was a break fix paradigm, right? What is wrong with this person, or why are they suffering? How are they suffering? How do we maybe get them from say like a -5 to a 0 and more content?
mhm,
And here was this field and these connected fields sort of saying, well, the question I was more interested in, how do we sort of tap into the best stuff they have to give, right?
mm.
Self-actualization, we can now think of it. And like I said, thriving or flourishing. And again, kind of long story short, the evolution has been that was a false dichotomy. It's really not an either or, it's a both and there's a role for both pleasantness and unpleasantness in how we sort of navigate our lives in ways
Yeah.
that are high quality and satisfying.
Mhm. Great. So that is your organizing theory of change, that's really centered on some of the tenets of positive psychology, which is saying, in a nutshell, there's light and dark in all things, and that by learning how to be comfortable with different aspects of this and learn how to use these different things intentionally, we can develop ourselves, show up as the people that we want to be, get better results in our lives, but also have a kind of net result at the end of the day where we experience more of what we want to feel in terms of the positive emotions, positive joy, but we cannot reject the darkness and the dark emotions in service of that, because that would be a mistake too.
Certainly not consistently, right? There's arguments for temporary distractions, and certainly there's interesting research around not over ruminating, right? But yeah, I think as is the case with many paradigms or sort of cultural zeitgeists, is we tend to overcorrect sometimes, right? And I think that's maybe what the field and a lot of the people that are frankly a bit dogmatic about it did, right? We overcorrected, and I'm not absolved of this, but we overcorrected a little bit. You can see where terms like toxic positivity are good examples of that overcorrection. And so what I do and what we try to do now is just thread that needle in a bit more nuanced way, right? That's why I mentioned the both and. It doesn't need to be either or.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so then thank you so much for sharing just a little bit about your background and your philosophy with our listeners here. And so I would love it if we could talk a little bit more about how to use some of these ideas. So, for example, we have someone, maybe even a couple people, Dr. Nick, who are tuned in today in hopes that they're going to hear something that will help them change their mindset. They have become aware, either because of the way that they feel or their habitual responses to things, or maybe even they are getting feedback from a spouse, a partner, that they are showing up in a negative way that tends to view the world as glass half empty, make them feel hopeless or helpless or want to give up before they start, expecting negative things to happen, or showing up just interpersonally as kind of grouchy, grumpy, joyless humans. If someone is tuning in here thinking, I need to cultivate some lighter, happier, more fun parts of myself because I want to feel better, I want to have better relationships, where would they even begin to think about starting? Where would you go first with that?
So maybe this is assumed in the question, but I would always start with, do you need to change?
Wonderful.
I think a really, really important distinction here is let's take something I think a lot of listeners will maybe know. So a growth and fixed mindset. This is like some of the most popular mindset talk.
Well,
right?
Don't assume that people have that.
So we'll explain.
Yeah, go.
We'll explain. But this is one of the more popular mindset theories, right? Carol Dweck out of Stanford. So the idea, exactly what it sounds like, it comes from incremental theories of intelligence. The idea that some people believe skills are fixed, meaning they cannot be changed. So this impacts how they take feedback. This impacts how they perceive challenges. This impacts how they sort of appraise the effort they have to give.
Yes.
You have people with growth mindset that will then perceive feedback and challenges and failures very different because they see it as a part of a process of growth, right? And so it's a front end belief. That's what a mindset is, right? A bridge between conscious and subconscious thinking. It's a front end belief that's really sort of then guiding expectations, which then also guides behavior and neurochemical reactions, right? Often it gets pitched as fixed or growth. And growth is better than fixed. Okay. And so this is a little hyperbolic, but, maybe we'll talk about, I do a podcast, Flourish FM. My co-host John is a Brit. He's in London most of the time, right? Should I have a growth mindset that I can swim across the Atlantic to have dinner with him? Probably not, right? I should probably have a fixed mindset there. There is a role for both. What I think is interesting about your question and is important is, does the context that this person is experiencing, right, and their desire to potentially shift their mindset align with their values, first and foremost, right? So if they do and they say, yeah, I've got a bit of a pessimistic, cynical, helpless, victimized sort of mindset, it sounds like, right?
Yeah.
And I see the utility in it, but man, do I need to shift the ratio a little bit and just temper, right? That's kind of what I'm hearing. Okay, so what are some of the like fundamental ways you might shift a mindset? Some of it has to start with
Actually,
evidence.
before you do, I
Okay.
need this needs to be, I think, said. So, I would love to actually hear you talk a little bit more about some of your thoughts around why someone who is objectively not having a good time and is kind of locked in thought patterns that prevent them from being able to sort of see opportunities and um, shift into some better feeling thoughts. And I, okay, so as a marriage and family therapist, I frequently see the byproduct of this show up in relationships. To
Mm-hmm.
be in a relationship with somebody like this, oftentimes the person on the other side, it starts to not feel good. It creates tension, it creates conflict, not so much like what is happening or not happening, but in it becomes an obstacle to intimacy and to connection
Sure.
frequently. So there could be problems that somebody is experiencing. And I'm so curious around what you would be viewing as reasons for why maybe you don't need to change at all. Maybe it's actually reframing or perhaps even embracing these dark aspects that are alive in your life right now that perhaps they serve a purpose. Is that it?
Yeah, you would
Tell
appreciate,
me
I
more.
think that, well, I think you would appreciate the distinction between like second and third wave, sort of like CBT versus ACT, right? That's what you're describing in many
Well,
ways. So go ahead. Yeah.
break this down for our
Yeah. Okay.
listener who does
Well,
not
you
know
really,
anything that you're talking about right now.
yeah, and you just said it, I think, very succinctly. You can kind of think of cognitive behavioral techniques as
Mm-hmm.
perspective taking and
Mm-hmm.
reframing and practicing seeing things from different angles and different realities, which is a really, really valuable skill and a fundamental aspect of emotional agility and
Mm-hmm.
psychological flexibility. But I think what we've been learning more and more, and my partner Adam's been great with this, I think coming more from the mental health counseling lens, is there's a lot to be said for acceptance, which
Sure.
is I'm feeling what I'm feeling. I'm not necessarily going to try to reframe this. And we can do reframing
Mm-hmm.
activities, which will help boost positivity. There's some easy ones. But sometimes I'm not necessarily going to try to reframe this. It's accurate.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to gaslight myself, which sometimes
Right.
CBT can slip into,
Yeah,
right?
totally. I am in a difficult chapter in my life. I'm dealing with
Yeah,
adversity. There are actually things to be unhappy about. Right.
exactly.
I
Right.
love
And
it.
so we can accept that in.
Mm-hmm.
And then here's the key, I think you said, right? Is does the mindset create, does it make us stuck or does it open up optionality?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And if accepting that things are unpleasant is
Mm-hmm.
actually the motivation, right? The volition
Yeah,
then that sparks the change, I would argue you do not necessarily need to change your mindset.
that makes perfect sense. I love
Right.
it.
And so is the emotion number one accurate? And if it is accurate, well, what do you want to do about it then at that point?
Got it.
Right. I totally agree. It's got to be about
Yeah,
optionality. It's got to be
right.
about opportunities.
Yeah,
And optimism opens up a lot of those.
right.
Sometimes pessimism does too.
Mm-hmm.
I got, great little anecdote. Dr. Karen Rivich, who directed resilience training programs at UPenn's Paz Psych Center for years, and still does some work with them. Brilliant, brilliant woman. We were having lunch when I was teaching in Los Angeles, and
Mm-hmm.
we were talking a lot about grit, which had just been gaining in popularity at that
Yes.
time. Angela's TED Talk had come out, the book had come out, all those sorts of things. And so you've got this expert on resilience, right? We're talking in this nuanced way about grit. And what she says to me is, sometimes you got to grit and sometimes you got to quit.
Absolutely.
Right. And like, how do you know you got to quit? Well, sometimes it's the negative feedback. It's not just reframing and being toxically
Right.
positive about excuse my language, but shitty situation.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
this is really good, and I think what I'm hearing in here Dr. Nick, is something, that I talk about with my listeners and guests frequently on the show, which is that I think that there are very different schools of thought about what it means to even have dark emotions. I don't call them negative emotions. I call them
Shadow
dark
side. Yeah.
emotions. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Because
Yep.
I think if you look at this from a psychopathology lens, and I think that we have sort of been taught in our culture that if you have dark emotions, sadness, anger, fear, we pathologize those. It's depression, it's anxiety, it's
Right.
shame. We need to push
Right.
those away. Those have no place in life. And when it comes to an actual psychiatric diagnosis where you're experiencing symptoms of something that are not really connected to what is happening in your life as much as your physiology is sending you these signals that actually are problematic, you're right, those need to be corrected in a different way. But because yes, I am a psychologist, I am a marriage and family therapist, but I also really specialize in coaching. What I'm hearing you say right now is very much in alignment with my view, which is that we need to listen to these dark emotions because they inform us of
They're data.
problems.
They're
They
data.
show us where we need to make changes, and they can become motivation to say, I don't like this. I need to fix it. And so
That's right.
that's what you're saying. If somebody
Yep.
is in this space and they're unhappy, they're not feeling good, to first and foremost, take a look around your life and think about why might that make sense? Is that it?
100%.
All
We
right.
just, right before we got on the call, right? I
Mm-hmm.
came from a client call. Actually, Adam and I came from a
Yeah.
client call. And the conversation was a whole lot of that person thinking another person was an issue
Mm.
and me asking questions about that other person's
Mm.
context or environment,
I see.
right? And trying to help them see what this other person was existing in or seeing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because one person looked at it and said, well, I think he should be feeling this way. But the actual person is, well, I'm actually feeling this way. And it's
Mm.
really simply because they're coming back to the CBT piece, but they're both pulling different pieces of evidence.
Right.
Both of them, to a certain extent, are right as they exist in their
Mm-hmm.
reality, right? And this other person, the second person, the person that's really having kind of a hard time,
Uh-huh.
I think is sort of looking around and saying, I shouldn't feel good about this.
Right.
I'm not trying to show up as a grump. I'm not trying to be detached. I'm not trying to be cynical.
Right.
I am those things because of the evidence,
Right.
right?
In
That's an important
response
distinction.
to
Yeah,
problem. Well, and that makes a lot of sense too, because you also talked about values, right?
right.
So that person B is like, actually, through my filter, through my belief system, I am experiencing the things, presence of things that appear to be problems that I am unhappy with, that I am not okay with. But also, I think baked into that is I have every right to be unhappy and to be not feeling good about this and to be able to um, embrace that, not feel like you have to
Yes.
reject it in order to make somebody else happy is really important. And I love this because I think you're so right that many times people can buy into this idea that if they don't feel good or if they're air quote negative, that there's something wrong with them. And what I hear you saying is maybe your emotional guidance system is working perfectly and that it's time to
Maybe.
listen to it instead of try to talk yourself out of it.
Maybe. Yep, maybe. And I
Okay.
think that's, again, coming back to the both and that's why we like
Mm-hmm.
cognitive behavior and acceptance commitment is
Yeah.
let's make sure the reality is the reality first. Let's check for thinking traps, push back against
Mm-hmm.
cognitive distortions, dispute kind of our automatic negativity bias a little
Right,
bit.
right.
But if we go through those processes and we're like, yeah, I'm pretty sure I'm confident my reality is the reality, well then you
Mm-hmm.
just got to deal with whatever the emotion is.
Mm.
You know, you're not going to gaslight yourself into it. We're pretty good bullshit detectors for ourselves, right?
Yes. Okay. Or, turn that into motivation to create resolution. And, because so I'm
Yeah.
a professional marriage counselor. That's what I do first and foremost. And I so often see that in relationships. And you really do have to figure out, am I unhappy because of my filter, because of my cognitive distortions,
Hmm.
or is there something that I really would like to have be different? And if
Hmm.
so, how are we going to fix it? But now, to keep going with this, in the event that it is actually door number one, that somebody does an assessment as like, no, my life is actually okay. When I objectively take an inventory, reality based, and I'm all right. And I still have this tendency to always think about, oh, but what could happen, or preparing myself for some kind of disappointment. And, obviously, in the absence of major depressive disorder, which can also create these, but, somebody recognizing that these are just habitual ways of thinking, right? Or expecting. What's next for you in their minds, particularly if it is creating problems for them? I'm like, I
Hmm.
want to be a happier person. I say, all my friends, like, they don't think about the same things I do. Everybody's
Hmm.
having a good time. I say something, and it's like that awkward moment of silence in the room where everybody's like, come on, can't you just
Hmm.
like lighten up? That kind of thing. Where
Yeah,
what
I'm
next?
thinking of as a child of the '80s, I'm thinking of the SNL character Debbie Downer, which was one of the
Debbie
more popular
Downer. Oh my,
skits. Yeah, womp womp.
who
Yeah,
was
exactly.
hilarious.
Yeah, yeah,
Yes.
she was great. Yeah, shout out Rachel Dratch. Yeah, I mean the simplest activity, and it's always hand wavy. It sounds a little fluky sometimes, poppy, but it's not. Random assignment, placebo controlled trials, like lots and lots of extensive study. It's gratitude. And people hear that and they think, oh, that's toxic positivity. Well, no, there's mixed emotions gratitude. And we can give you the simplest example. Like some of the most profound moments of gratitude actually occur at funerals,
Mm.
beside the
Oh,
sadness and the loss and the disappointment, right? And
yeah.
this is where we have to talk both and. You
Yeah.
can be grateful for good things that are objectively present in one's life
Mhm.
and be upset or frustrated or annoyed or disappointed about other things. There's
Mhm.
there's no rule somewhere that says it is one or the other, right?
Mhm.
So why gratitude? Well, we just talked about making sure that our perception of reality to the best extent possible is fact based, is
Mhm.
evidence based, right? What is practicing gratitude? It is literally stopping and starting to execute neuroplasticity, right? Rewiring the brain
Mm.
to get better at seeing good things. You're practicing seeing what good things are already there or have already occurred. And
Mm.
so naturally, what you start to do, especially if you write it down, which we're, I think, learning more and more has interesting connections to conscious and subconscious thought, you are priming the brain then to expect more good things to happen. And then to naturally, it seems, I don't think we fully understand mechanism yet, but to then search for those things. And so
Mm.
one of the outcomes for a lot of folks that practice more gratitude is increased optimism,
Mhm.
decreased anxiety, right? Because they're
Mhm.
expecting more good. And maybe by default, they're also anticipating less bad.
Yeah. Okay. So you're talking about reprogramming yourself in some ways, almost a hack, if you will. And I don't mean to say it so lightly, because you're right. There is a ton of evidence, but that um, there is a type of cognitive bias that leads people to simply notice more negative things than positive things. And when you are habitually doing this, you will feel worse, you'll expect more negative things. And the reality, I mean, objective reality, is that the world is always a mixed bag. There are things that, yes, we could be
Yep.
mad and upset about, and there are also things that are objectively awesome. And that when you practice and train yourself to notice more of the good things, you will feel better. Yeah.
Correct. Correct.
So, just out of curiosity, it's a follow up question here. I know that one of the things that you and your partner really focus on and specialize in rather, is related to performance coaching. So, one of the things that you're doing, you're going into organizations, or even working with individual contributors to help them improve not just their outcomes, but like get a handle on what are you doing that is leading to these outcomes, because that's our locus of control, right?
Right.
And so, what would you imagine might change in the outcomes of someone, even just personally in their relationship or as a parent or their life, but also perhaps at work, if they were able to begin consistently practicing this one skill of noticing all the things that are working pretty darn well and feeling
Yeah.
gratitude for that?
And that's why I think, gratitude is fine as a practice and a term, but really
Mm,
what you're doing is identifying good stuff.
yeah.
Okay. And so another way of thinking about that is noticing and savoring wins.
Mm,
Why is that a nice natural extension and an important piece of performance? And you mentioned, yeah, we work with a high level execs. We
hmm
also work with a lot of professional and collegiate athletes. And so if you want to make it a really acute performance example, um, high level athletes, right? And by default, if you're a collegiate athlete, you're already top 1% of the
mm.
athletes in your sport, right? If you're a professional, it's obviously a magnitude of, I think, 100x, something crazy like
I
that.
did not know that. Thank you for
It's it's
sharing.
it's wild. It's very, very small probability. So you're
Mm,
already a badass,
mm.
right? But you have a pretty intense negativity bias. You're probably highly competitive. Oftentimes, your identity is wrapped up in your performance. In the case of professionals, your
I'm so sorry.
livelihood.
Are you saying that like these high level athletes have a tendency towards a negativity bias?
Yes,
That is
100%.
counterintuitive.
Oh, so I see. To me, it makes a lot of sense because their livelihood rides on this. So let's take
Hmm.
collegiate athletes, right? We
Okay.
work
Yes.
with some really high level women's programs in
Hmm.
particular, right? Their happiness oftentimes rests on the words the coach delivers,
Oh, that's
right?
a vulnerable place to be
It's
in.
a very vulnerable place to be. And the coaches, we work with great people, great programs. They
Hmm.
know it, right? But it's really tricky because you're trying to be in a position where you can give criticism and feedback and help them
Sure.
grow, but be a warm demander and those sorts of things.
Hmm.
And so these players, they're maybe they're on scholarship. There's all the social connections,
Yeah.
right? Their community is the team, right? More or less. There's all the academic implications, there's logistic implications.
Hmm.
This has to work,
Yeah.
right? So any negative experience that then potentially turns into catastrophizing and
Mm.
rumination, right?
Hmm.
Catastrophizing is worst case thinking, which is
Right.
what the negativity bias is designed to do.
Got
Hey,
it.
red alert, saber-tooth tiger, poison berries, right? Get
Yeah.
out, get out, get out.
Right.
If they can't temper that,
Hmm.
right, then they're going to be in a whole world of hurt. And
I
so a
can
lot of
get that.
times it's, hey, okay, we can talk all the CBT skills around decatastrophizing, but maybe we should just pause to be like, by the way, you've been playing this since you were 5. Cool.
Hmm.
You're now top 1% in this country for this sport. And in this case, we're mostly talking women's soccer, which is
Hmm.
the place in the world for it. Okay. You are now a part of a program that is actually a top 20 program, right? Those
Hmm.
things didn't happen overnight. What did you do well to get here? What are the
Hmm.
skills you're bringing to the table? Did you
Hmm.
all of a sudden start playing soccer and then become a Division 1 top player? No,
Hmm.
of course not. You accumulated wins and growth and steps along the way. I
Hmm.
want to hear about those. I want you identifying those. And you start there because the fundamental place of self efficacy, there's 4 main sources of self efficacy, our
Hmm.
belief in our ability to do something, is previous accomplishment.
Yeah.
If I did it before, guess what? I'm going to be generally optimistic that I can do it again. And
Hmm.
so what do I need? I need evidence that I did it before. That's
Mm.
win savoring. It's not the same thing as gratitude, but it is using our
Yeah.
attentional capacity to spotlight good things that have occurred.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is so good because I could imagine, somebody in the place that you're describing, so high achieving athlete getting hyped on, oh, but I, kicked it to the left and then it didn't go into the net or whatever the thing, and like ruminating on that, and also feeling this, I'm going to lose my community, my scholarship, my status in the world, my self-concept if I do that, too many times, which I mean, they're not wrong too. Like there is a lot hanging on this in terms of their performance. But so you're saying really to be bringing people back to the things that they have control over, the things that they've done in the past, to restore their trust and their confidence in themselves so that they can calm down and probably, well, I mean, we also know that when we're scared, when we're escalated, when we're elevated, while it can, sharpen things a little bit,
you want to get into that?
Fully present. Yeah, let's do that.
Let's get into that. There's a nice connection and a sweet spot, right? Great, and so eustress is the term, right? The sweet spot.
Let's talk about this. This is good.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is where we need the both and again. So if we're talking about performance, I think we would make the argument that we do not control performance. Okay. If you look at a flow state, if you look at states where you are totally and completely absorbed, transient hypofrontality, right? We lose a sense of self, we lose inner critic, time dilates. Okay.
Sure.
Those are moments of automaticity. Those are not moments of robotic control, right? We're not joysticking there. Right. We've done the prep work. And we're either ready or we are not.
Yeah, you kind of like just drop into it naturally. It's like falling asleep. You're like, I'm there.
Exactly, right? And the moment, so there's a couple of things here. One, it's really interesting for high performers to all of a sudden potentially acknowledge they don't control that moment. Because they think that's what performance is. They do not. Some do not like that. Some treat it as relief. Right? Because, everything that is going to put me in the situation, right, to have the highest probability to be successful in that moment, a lot of those things are under my control.
Yeah.
What's the work that I put in? What's the mental prep that I put in? What's the visualization that I go through, right? Those sorts of things. But I think the second piece is maybe the most important takeaway. The most ubiquitous trigger of those fully absorbing sort of high performance experiences is the appropriate level of challenge. Because there is no choice when we have the appropriate level of challenge. It demands all of us. We don't need the novelty or the joy or the funness. Like it demands all of us, right? So we have to be totally and completely absorbed. Well, if it demands all of us, it's going to be hard. And guess what that comes with? Unpleasantness. It is a necessary contributor to peak performance.
Yeah.
Right? Is that discomfort level. Again, the both and. This is what eustress is, right?
Right.
That sort of sweet spot. So yeah, you want to be able to savor wins and you want to have confidence as you take on these challenges. But if you are only looking at that and only thinking about those things, we would argue you're setting yourself up for a fragile confidence, right? So take this example. Visualization. We tell our athletes you should not be exclusively visualizing ideal outcomes. Because what's going to happen then when things do not go down your track, your timeline, right?
You are going to be devastated and fall apart.
That's right. You'll be surprised, right? It's going to feel volatile. Yeah. Like, where did this come from, right? So what do? Well, you visualize the obstacles and you visualize your plans for how you're going to deal with the obstacles. And you go through these different timelines, embracing and accepting some of the unpleasantness of them so that you have an anti-fragile confidence. You have more flexibility in how you approach those things, right? And these are just different examples of where when you look at performance literature, you cannot escape the pleasant and unpleasant sort of dynamic in that both and kind of paradigm.
I love this because in order to get into flow, you have to be challenged and you also have to work at it. And that is hard. Additionally, in order to be a resilient, anti-fragile person who can achieve more, you need to be very comfortable with the times that things don't work well.
Correct.
And not just, to be able to expect it to a certain degree, and a different mindset that this is actually part of the experience, not something to avoid.
That piece right
Yeah.
there is key because in the sports psych literature, there's
Mm.
typically a distinction between a flow state and a clutch state. And for if you know any of your
What's
listeners
a
aren't sports
clutch
people,
state?
yeah,
I
clutch
haven't
state
heard
is
of that
like
before.
so think of it as the final moments of the competition, right?
Mm.
And it's the highest pressure moment, maybe for that team or that individual player.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll give you a good example and we can string this together. There's a professional basketball player, Damian Lillard. Okay. He grew up in Oakland. Okay. He
Mm-hmm.
had a rough time, to say the least. He has become, literally his nickname is Dame Time, okay, as opposed to Game Time, because he
Okay.
has hit so many buzzer beating shots in clutch moments. His most famous was to actually knock a team out of the playoffs. So
Hmm.
Damien gets asked about this a lot, right? Like, why are you so clutch in these final moments? And his answer is really, really profound and helpful. And he said, because they're not pressure. Pressure is the single mom, like my mom, trying to put food on the table.
Yeah.
Pressure is the homeless guy looking for the next meal, right? I'm playing a game.
Ah,
Why
so
is that
good.
important? Because back to perspective taking, his
Right.
appraisal is not one of threat. It's
Mm-hmm.
one of opportunity, right? It's one of, I want this. I've looked forward to this. This is
Mm-hmm.
exciting.
Yeah.
And if we put people through an fMRI, right,
Uh-huh.
we would
Yeah.
have trouble distinguishing excitement from anxiety.
Right.
Energetically, they show up really similarly, right? The
Definitely.
difference is that cognitive framing.
Yeah.
Okay?
Oh, that's so
And so
good.
he's not seeing it as unpleasant, right? He's seeing it as like, yeah, I feel the energy, but like, cool,
Mm-hmm.
this is kind of what I live for.
Right.
This is
Right. I
exciting, right?
want to be here right
Yeah,
now. I enjoy this. Yeah.
right. But
Mm-hmm.
even if he didn't, and this is
Right.
where we come back to acceptance, he would be okay, or clutch players would be okay feeling that intensity and feeling that
Mm.
pressure and still trusting that their preparation will nudge their body to respond appropriately anyway.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. They trust themselves.
Yes.
So then taking so this is incredibly helpful. And
Cool.
I'm a stand-in for our listeners here right now. And I'm thinking about somebody listening to this who's thinking, I am not an elite athlete.
Mm-hmm.
I have had some crappy life experiences. I notice that I am consistently negative or perceiving things as too hard
Mm.
or too you know what it is, Nick? I think that there are a lot of people who actually don't trust themselves yet. And they become afraid of dark emotions. They become paralyzed by them. They think that when they're feeling badly, there are things that are very, very wrong. And so they need to get away from their feelings, first of all. But I think additionally, there's this frustration because people want to learn how to feel more joy, I think, experience more connection, feel like they're being a more balanced person. Like if somebody is leaning too heavily into that dark side. And again, just over and over, I really see this show up in the context of relationships. And so if you have someone who is dealing with more garden variety, life experiences, how might they apply some of these ideas in a way that they can begin practicing some of these skills and developing this new trust in themselves, I think, to be in difficult situations and have that be okay, but also start to train themselves to just experience more trust in themselves, experience more
Mm-hmm.
of their own
Mm-hmm.
strength, expect more positive things out of life and other people. I think that that's where the rubber hits the road for a lot of folks. And that's, oh, I see you taking notes. I'll stop talking. I don't
No,
want
it's
to
okay. Yeah, I
ask
just know
questions that are
there's a
so long. People have to like write down.
it's okay. There's a
No, it's
couple
okay.
threads of thought
There
that I wanted to
are, there
include
are,
here.
but yeah.
Okay. So First, let me say, right,
Yeah.
I'm not a therapist, right? And so I'm always real cautious about anything involving the uppercase trauma.
Oh, of course. And
Right. I
we're
think
not talking about
I get
that.
it.
But
I
I
get it.
have my
But I'm
coach
going
hat
to.
on. Okay.
But I'm going to, right?
All right.
Because PTSD gets all the publicity, but it's the outlier.
Oh,
The
it is.
the default is PTG, which is a good entry point into this conversation. That's post traumatic growth,
Mm-hmm.
right? So what tends to be the distinguisher? Cognitive flexibility, psychological flexibility, emotional agility, right? People are
Mm-hmm.
able to basically benefit find. They're able to take otherwise or maybe objectively like really crappy circumstances, and they're able
Mm-hmm.
to find more meaning or deepen relationships or
Mm-hmm.
find something that something good that came from it, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is not to, obviously not everybody experiences that. I'm not at all implying that we have total and complete control over that. There's genetic factors, personality factors, environmental factors. But in terms
Mm-hmm.
of some of the things we hopefully can have some efficacy over and control, some
Mm-hmm.
of it is our outlook, right?
Okay.
So
And
that
so
brings
if
us,
I just to
go
pause.
ahead.
So
Yeah.
so for people
Yep.
who aren't familiar with some of these terms, what Dr. Nick is talking about. So post-traumatic stress disorder is going through something deeply traumatic that impairs your ability to function, and it changes the way that you think, feel, and behave. And that is
Right.
something that does happen, and it requires treatment. And treatment, there are very robust and effective treatments for this. So not a death sentence. And there is a different thing that when we go through challenging, even sometimes very scary and capital T traumatic life experiences, these can also be perceived as growth generating life experiences that wind up changing us in a way that we value and appreciate, not in spite of the trauma, but because of it. And
That's right.
so there are things that you can do differently in order to generate that kind of growth. So I just wanted to say that in lay people's terms, because
Yep.
I love it. I know what you're talking about, but I don't
Yep.
want to assume that some of our
No, I'm
listeners
glad.
do. Just mm,
Yeah, it's a good explanation, and I think it bridges us into the next piece because
yeah.
if you're going to experience the growth part of it, the
Mm-hmm.
benefit finding part of it, right? And this is back to your question, sort of how do I do this? Well, you've got to be able to look at sort of evidence from the past,
Mm-hmm.
where things have gone bad, but something good came of it, where
Mm,
things didn't go your way, but you grew from it, right?
right.
Whatever it might be. But I think this is the most important part and maybe the most tangible, applicable. I just did this in a talk on Monday for a big
Mm-hmm.
healthcare company. I do it in almost all of our talks. So your listeners can take 60 seconds. They can pause it if they want to take 60 seconds, but they should try to write down every emotion that they can think of.
Mm,
Okay. So if let's assume that they paused it and they're now coming back. If not, I'm going to give you the spoiler. But usually the group average, maybe double digits, the amount of emotions people can name off the top of their head. And even
okay.
then, a lot of it is because of Inside Out in the last like 5 to 7 years, right? Like literally
Yeah.
one of the responses was, oh, primary or secondary emotions, right? Because that's how they were viewing it. Which is the only time I've gotten that question.
Mm,
But my point is so you get that and you say, all right, on average, a large group, this was 100 people. Okay. The group mean is maybe being able to name 10 emotions.
uh-huh.
So then you show them something like the mood meter, which is what the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence uses. And there's about 100
Are we
different
talking about the
emotions.
wheel?
It's not a
Mood
wheel. It's
meter?
four. It's a 2x2, so 4 quadrants, and
Okay.
it's X and Y axis by pleasantness and intensity. So
You
your
guys,
red,
I'm going to track down the
yeah,
link and I will put it in the show notes for this episode. Okay. The
easy to
mood
find,
meter.
easy to use. Here's how you think about it. Top left, red is unpleasant and intense.
Mm-hmm.
Blue is unpleasant but low energy, right? Green is pleasant but low energy, serenity, calm.
Mm-hmm.
Yellow is pleasant but high energy, joy,
Yeah.
ecstasy, right? Those sorts of things, okay?
Got it.
If you were to start learning a new language, right, and you had 10% of the vocabulary, which is what 10 emotions out of the 100 is, you probably wouldn't be too set up to become fluent,
Mm-hmm.
right? And the reality is that most people's emotional lexicon and emotional vocabulary is terrible.
Mm-hmm.
I cannot count the times that we start out with a client and everything unpleasant gets described as stress. Well, no, that's frustration. That's boredom. That's sadness. That's
Mm-hmm.
disappointment. That's apathy. That's irritation. That's nervousness. And that's anxiety. None of those things, by the way, are stress. Right. And so the starting point has to be, and here's where we'll, if your listeners know the Pareto principle, the 80-20 rule, this is the
Mm-hmm.
way we frame it. Because who's going to walk away? Oh, I'll go learn 100 emotions. Try to get more precise about the 20 that you think you're experiencing in life 80% of the time, or that you want to be experiencing more
Mm-hmm.
frequently. What's the difference between joy and ecstasy?
Mm-hmm.
What's the difference between calm and serenity?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Do you need more laughter and humor? Right? But in terms of some of the unpleasant things you're trying to accept, if it's frustration, well, that's about control. If it's sadness, that's about loss.
Yeah.
If it's disappointment, that's about a gap between expectations and outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
Those all require different responses and different strategies. And so if we don't
Mm-hmm.
get that level of granular precision on the front end, we can end up trying to solve for the wrong problems.
That makes so much sense. And so what I think I'm hearing you say is that if you would like to generally be a happier person and have a better time, with the understanding that there are many complexities related to this, but one of
Yes.
the competencies you can develop is a competency, which is to get a more clear and nuanced understanding of what it is that your emotions are trying to tell you
Yes.
about certain life experiences so that you can address them in effective ways. Is that
Or
it?
amplify them or
Yeah.
savor them or
Yeah.
download them. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Or
Okay.
leverage them. This is anti-fragility, right? Like, so resilience is, oh, I'm experiencing red or blue. I want to get rid of it, right? Well-being or positivity might be, I want more green and yellow.
Mm-hmm.
But anti-fragility is sometimes like, well, I'm going to lean into blue and red to help myself grow or expand in some
Mm.
way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
So you think of like some of the highest elements of a self-actualized life, right? And the number 2 predictor of life satisfaction. It's meaning, it's transcendence. And so I like to take Paul Bloom from Yale's word, like chosen suffering, right? That
Mm-hmm.
often comes with unpleasantness. We're actually choosing to do hard things. We're choosing to lean into uncomfortable things. That's what empathy is, by the way, in a lot of cases, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not avoid red and blue and embrace yellow and green. It's you said it very well. Just be thoughtful and have your
Yeah.
strategies about how you interact with the 4 quadrants and the
Right.
ways in which they are or not values aligned.
Yeah. Yeah. But that begins, I think, with a different mindset, a different mentality, which is that there is so much value in
Yes.
the red and the blue, to
Yes.
use your language, and that it's actually by going into these places that we will really grow and develop ourselves and ultimately have more of what we want.
Yeah, we were talking about Angela Duckworth
Yeah.
earlier. We just
Mm-hmm.
mentioned grit, but thinking about a phrase a colleague would say a lot. Um, so grit, she argues, is 2 components, right? Passion and perseverance.
Mm-hmm.
That's such a good example because it's the pleasant and unpleasant side of grittiness. The
Yeah.
passion is the pull. Yeah, I want to do this thing. It's approach behaviors. It builds all sorts of resources because I keep coming back to it.
Mm-hmm.
And this colleague would argue that has to come first. Like there's got to be something pleasant enough or positive enough that's worth being gritty for.
Yeah.
And I think that's it's a little bit of an extension of like the glass half empty, half full
Mm-hmm.
sort of piece. Not the way we view it, but like my cup needs to be partially full for me to pour into others.
Mm-hmm.
I find it to be similar.
Yeah. Now that makes a lot of sense. And I think through my framework, somebody who specializes in relationships, and just for the benefit too of people listening to this, I think that's why relationships are such a powerful vehicle for personal transformation, is because people care enough about their partners that passion piece, like they want it to
Mm-hmm.
work. There's an attachment. And so then I think they find it in themselves to have the grit to do the hard things that are really necessary in order to have a better relationship, which
Hmm.
is generally working on ourselves and the
Hmm.
way that we show up, and to then be valuing, air quote, relationship issues as opportunities. I think that
Hmm.
that's something that's often overlooked. And I have to tell you, I'm so glad we're talking about this, because one of the things that I just feel so saddened about whenever I encounter it, particularly I think just like in media and popular culture these days, is this association that when things are feeling difficult in a relationship, so much of the advice is to end the relationship.
Yeah.
It's the match. It's you're not compatible. You would have a different experience if you were with a
Yeah.
different person. And first of all, I think that that is rarely true because we bring our stuff with us. But the other thing is that when people buy into that mentality, it deprives them of opportunities to use their relationship as this very important stage, this playing field, to go back to a sports metaphor, for growth. And so they don't develop themselves. They just kind of go from one relationship to another. And I think what I'm hearing in there is a good illustration of that, related to that passion and grit analogy. So thank you
Hmm.
for bringing that
Hmm.
up.
Well, I
Yeah.
think you can see it in relationships too, because I totally
Yeah.
appreciate what you're saying about the passion or the love angle. And
Hmm.
just speaking from my own marriage, like behavior change is fueled for me by fear too. I don't want to be I don't want to be lonely. I don't want to lose
Yeah.
my wife. You know, like
Right.
that's the yin and the yang of it. And it's okay for both of those, like to
Yeah.
sometimes be reminded and we always say, I've been traveling a lot for talks and stuff lately, and
Hmm.
I don't love being away from her, or vice versa,
Yeah.
for a variety of different reasons. But in a little bit of the nerdy psychologist, I have said to her, like, there is legitimacy to the absence makes the heart kind of grow fonder, where you
Hmm.
you can come back appreciating or having maybe intensified fear of, I know these little drops of how it feels to not be there, not have
Hmm.
it. I want to use that as motivation to make sure
Absolutely.
I keep my shit together and don't lose
Absolutely.
it permanently, right? And so I think it's just a really nice
Yeah.
illustration of the kind of this both and we've been talking
Hmm.
about. Yeah.
A perfect example that so many people can relate to, going
Yeah.
into that dark emotion quadrant, or half, and thinking about the possibility of future loss, and using that as
Yep.
motivation to
Yep.
do things that are maybe not always natural or comfortable, but are for the benefit of your relationship because of
We had
the importance. Yeah.
Yeah, we had Dan Pink onto the show, and his newest book is on regret. That's what it is. It's
Mm,
actually projecting out
yeah.
crappy feeling, right? And
Hmm.
embracing it to
Right.
hopefully motivate change in the now.
Exactly. Oh, I love it. Well, I feel like I could just talk to you all day, Nick. And I'm so pleased that we will have the opportunity to talk again with your
Same
partner
here. This has
on
been great.
love, happiness, and success for therapists, because I know some therapists listen to love, happiness, and success, but we get real nerdy on love, happiness, and success for therapists, because I think
Cool.
it not all therapists, I think, really understand how to use positive psychology in the way that we are talking about. And so I think that we might have people listening to this with us right now who are maybe doing growth work and be like, I want my therapist to know what Lisa and Nick are talking about right now.
Hmm.
Send them over to Love, Happiness, and Success for Therapists. So we're going to do a part 2 here. But I'm just so grateful for your discussion of how to use some of these ideas that are very grounded in science and research, and how they're often applied in really elite settings, top athletes or executive sales performers, but that we're talking about them today in a way that will help our listeners apply them in other parts of their lives, their
Right.
relationships, their
That's right.
relationship with themselves, how they feel day to day, how they show up in the world. And so, what a gift, because, a lot of people don't get to hear the kind of advice that you're giving today directly from the horse's mouth.
Well, I appreciate that, and I appreciate your show and this platform because that's really actually our mission is
Mm.
to take what we do in sort of these, let's call it
Hmm.
high level circles and
Yeah,
democratize it. I
I
told you
love
earlier, I
that.
came from education, right? The
Hmm.
only reason I'm not in it is because I have problems with the system itself. But if we can figure out a way to like really maximize human potential, and
Yeah,
I don't mean that in a super utilitarian way, but so that people feel good and are kicking ass and crushing it,
right.
that's really what we are about and why we're here, right? And so being
Yeah.
able to sort of disseminate some of this stuff freely so that people
Hmm.
can just get access to it is an
Yes.
opportunity we always enjoy having.
I know. I love it. I love it. And that to democratize it, that, yeah,
Yeah,
yes, some people pay $20,000 for
that's right.
a retreat with Nick to hear this. And now here we are.
We
So,
want
but
as many people to have access as possible.
well, let's talk about this. So, people need to know about your podcast and your mission and your organization. We
Sure.
have business leaders who also listen to this show who might actually be interested in you coming and talking to their people or doing
Sure.
trainings, developing resources for teams as part of what you do. So, tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, well, the podcast is done with Dr. John Beal, who's a research affiliate for the Human Flourishing
Hmm.
Program at Harvard. We basically bring on PhDs, MDs, like world-renowned experts on very specific topics that
Mm.
almost exclusively fall on the flourishing side of the paradigm
Mm.
we've talked about today.
Hmm.
That said, at least half of the guests, we've had very nuanced conversations about the roles of unpleasantness in human flourishing. So you'll get a little bit of that taste, but it's generally research focused on very specific topics that those people are experts in.
Okay.
In terms of the work with executives and some of the coaching, consulting talks, those sorts of things, people can get in touch with me through the Anti-Fragile Academy and our website. You'll see
Hmm.
Adam there as well. And happy to connect. But yeah, there's all of that has a variety of free resources, whether it's the podcast, YouTube
Hmm.
channel, social clips. We're trying to just get it out there
Yeah.
freely. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, thank you for getting it out there today with us. It was such a joy to speak with you. I appreciate it.
Thank you again.